The stream has started. Okay, and let's see who accepts the stream. Twitch has accepted the stream. YouTube has accepted the stream. And Facebook has accepted the stream. Are you ready to start?
Yes, I'm ready. Is everyone ready?
All right.
Good.
I'll turn
Great.
myself off here. Okay, the timer's in the center of the screen. When it says on the air, you're on the air, okay?
Great.
Okay, here we go, Vicki.
Welcome to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center, being recorded at Think Twice Radio in the home of the future, also the home of our friend and producer, Richard Wicca. Thanks, Richard. And we also thank our friends at Buff State, Buffalo's original alternative radio station. Thank you, WBNY and Buff State. And when I think of thankfulness, I think of our friends, our indigenous friends, our Haudenosaunee friends, and indigenous people everywhere, as well as enslaved people who still, despite land being stolen, despite being stolen off their land in the various cases, for people who were enslaved and brought here, still. Thankfulness is such a key element, and people start off the indigenous people start all of their events with the words that should come before all others, which basically look at the creation, the world, and go through all the elements in thankfulness for those elements, for the plants and animals, for the Mother Earth, for the Creator, and for the love that animates it all. And for that, I am so grateful. And actually, on Haudenosaunee country, people say Nyahweh, and then the people say Nyo or Je. So if you want to say Nyo, Nyahweh, thank you. So I'm especially thankful that we have a wonderful group of guests here to talk tonight about a number of things. I could say, the wonderful and the terrible, which are always intimately connected anyway. So we're going to talk about the work that each one of our wonderful guests are doing, and also talk about Craig McIver's award that he's getting at the Western New York Peace Center annual dinner, as well as to talk about the issues that he's been working on and that we've all been working on around Gaza, around the flagrant violations of international law, around the need to stop arming Israel and really strengthen up our international organizations that abide by international law. So we've got a lot to cover. So just going around as the Haudenosaunee do, I'll say, I'll start with Rob Jareski. Hi, Rob.
Hello. Should I introduce myself?
Oh, you can. Yes, you can introduce yourself. Sure.
Okay. So I'm Robert Jareski. I live in New York City, and I'm one of the volunteer coordinators of Code Pink's efforts in New York City to pressure countries to isolate Israel and to sanction Israel until it behaves, until it stops violating international law, wantonly murdering Palestinians, starving the entire population, etc. So all the horrible things that we have unfortunately witnessed it do in the last year, we're trying to get countries to stop that. So that's who I am.
And that's what, and you do all kinds of work for Move the Money and all kinds of related, and they're all related to peace and justice. So we're grateful for you, Rob. Robert,
thank you.
And another lawyer, our wonderful upcoming Stellar Media Activist Award winner, Craig McIver. Now, Craig has, let me just at least start introducing you with the fact that there's just too many things to say about all the wonderful work Craig has done over the years from as a human rights expert, international law expert, senior official at the UN for over 30 years, and who quit based on all the failings over what's going on in Gaza and Palestine. And he's a writer. He's an author. He is just a clear thinker. He's written some powerful, compelling things. Speaks so powerfully and compellingly, and we're so grateful to have you on, Craig.
Vicki, so nice to be with you again. So nice to be with all of you again. I'm very happy to be here on this station in particular.
Oh, well, we're very excited to have you on again. And actually, all of you have been on the show. I would say friend of the show in every case. And especially last but not least, Kathy Kelly, very much a friend of the show, even though I know the timing is not good for you. But we're and friend of the Western New York Peace Center. I mean, so when we talk about the annual dinner, I mean, you have some real experience there too. So Kathy Kelly, world-renowned peace and justice activist, who's had, it was Voices for Creative first it was Voices in the Wilderness and Voices for Creative Nonviolence. Now the chair of World Beyond War, and does so many things for so many groups, for Afghans, for Gazans, for just so many groups that need help, have gotten so much help from Kathy. So welcome, Kathy. I'm not hearing you. I don't know.
Maybe she's muted. There you go.
Are you muted by chance? Try again.
I'm not muted, but maybe.
There you are. No, it's good. We can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay, and I wasn't able to hear Craig when he was speaking, but.
Well, I hope Richard can solve whatever's happening. And meanwhile, I hope that this is all taping well so that we can hear all of it. So Kathy, thank you for coming so much. So and then as a first go round, if we could just start with on the topics of, well, how I'm going to say on the topic of stellar media, which is what Craig is getting an award for, and international law. When we think about those items and how they support Palestine, if you want to, each of you just mention a value or two that you think of in that connection. So you already did some of that, Rob, but if you just want to just pick a related value or two.
So I'm not familiar with Stellar Media, Vicki. I know that it's like an important award that Craig is getting, but I don't know much about the background. So how I would relate that to international law, I don't know.
I would just say, just what you think media think about. What
media.
What values we need to think of when we think of media and international, either or both. They're not necessarily.
Yeah, of course. I mean, media has been, to me, like, transparency, accountability, it provides a window to far away places where our tax money is doing terrible things. Our bombs, our supposed allies. So it's, I'm talking about the U.S. government, but media serves those important values of holding accountable those who are violating international law.
So right. You're so right. Well put. Thank you, Rob. And Craig?
Yeah, I think that was a great start. And I think I would just add on the kind of values connected to international law side that, international human rights law says that free expression, freedom of information are fundamental human rights guarded by international law. And we know that because, as we've spoken about before, that the genocide happening in Palestine could not be sustained without the support of the United States government. And a part of the strategy to sustain that U.S. government support is to make sure that the people in the United States don't know what's actually happening on the ground. And part of that happens on the ground in Gaza through the murder of Palestinian journalists targeted by the Israelis, one after another, setting a world record for the number of journalists that have been killed, for attacks and seizures on Palestinian journalists in Gaza and in the West Bank, journalist institutions and facilities in all of the occupied territories, through also the banning of foreign journalists. To make sure that the story doesn't get out that way. So you keep the foreign journalists out, you ban Al Jazeera, and you kill the local Palestinian journalists. You impose a very strict military censorship system at the same time. So this is all on the sort of from the ground, the sending end as well. You do all you can to block the internet and electricity and so on to prevent things from going out. You establish a transnational program of propaganda, as the Israelis have done, enforce it domestically, and then use influence in the West to make sure that essentially is happening in the West as well. We've seen as well the fabrication of atrocities, especially on October 7th, created by Israel out of whole cloth. And then, for example, the 40 beheaded babies that never were, in order to create a dehumanization of the Palestinians and a justification for genocide and crimes against humanity against them. This is all a part of that information strategy on the ground. And then beyond that, you use organizations in the West to pressure journalists and media companies so that they don't publish reports that are critical of Israel. You have media corporations in the West, so-called mainstream media corporations that are both ideologically, the owners are both ideologically committed to the project of Israeli impunity, but they also have important economic interests in maintaining that particular story. And so you see all of the major networks and newspaper publications in the West blacking out the reality of the genocide on the ground and disseminating propaganda for Israel. All of this in violation of these international human rights guarantees of freedom of information, freedom of expression, and so on. And all of them knowingly disseminating this disinformation, propaganda, justifying war crimes, crimes against humanity, the reports in this country that consistently dehumanize Palestinians, block out information on the genocide in the West. These are all, in the case of genocide, Vicky, I would say there are, as I've written, there are precedents in international law for holding media figures accountable for incitement to genocide and complicity in genocide because they knowingly disseminated these dehumanizing and insightful and distorted messages to encourage the continuation of the carnage on the ground. And they could be, as they have been, subject to legal prosecutions, as they were in Nuremberg, and as some were in the Rwanda tribunals as well. But even if it doesn't rise to that level, you can see civil actions for damages. You can see social movements and campaigns holding these companies accountable by affecting their bottom lines, unsubscribing, and so on. And just to finish this thought, as I always do, never talk about the media in this way without saying that the last thing we want to do is to erode free speech guarantees, because we know very well that free speech guarantees usually protect us the most, those of us who are not in power, those of us who are challenging the orthodoxies, who are challenging power, challenging the government. And we don't want to erode those because they will come first, not for the New York Times or the Washington Post or Fox News. They'll come for us. So we need to make sure that as we challenge this disinformation and these dehumanizing and insightful reporting by Western media, that we don't do anything to erode the free speech guarantees that are so important for all of us. So all of this, is something that is codified in international human rights law. It is something for which there are precedents of holding people accountable. But in the end, as always, action and accountability in this realm falls on us, on people, on movements, on civil society, because if we're waiting either for the government of the US or an international organization to save us, that salvation is not coming. It's really up to us.
No, Craig, you just gave a perfect illustration of why you're getting the Stellar Media Award. So if you want to know what the Stellar Media Award about, it's about people who are able to spread those messages, those many vitally, critically important messages, and in so many arenas as you do. So we'll get to more of that. Thank you so much, Craig. And Kathy, what are some values that you want to mention in terms of media and international law in today's issues?
Well, I'm so sorry not to have heard a word that Craig said, and I don't want to repeat what's already been said, so I'll pass. Thank you.
Well, okay. So you don't want to mention I'll have to make sure that you get. We'll make sure you get this copy. But what you might think of when you think of international law or media, some of the values that we need to think of.
Well, I think it's been so telling each time there's been a national debate that the issues related to international law, foreign policy are sort of shuttled to the end if they're mentioned at all. And we find that the United States people are woefully undereducated around issues that are so important, especially because it's our policies that have so horribly brutalized people all around the world. And when I think about the possibility of ever paying reparations for the suffering we caused in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in the West Bank, in Gaza now, people are, again, so acutely unaware. It was very impressive to me that the student movement last spring was as motivated and competent as people were. But again, I don't think the media is covering the ways in which the student movement has been abused, really, by short-sighted, narrow-minded leaders of universities. So, some people had said, well, it's not so important what happens in November, it's what happens in September. And we really need those student movement activists, but I'm afraid they've been shortchanged by people leading their universities.
Well, thank you, Kathy. I'm so glad that you did provide an answer, because you have your own special nuances that you put in there that are so important, and there are a lot of them about, which again is a theme in everything that you all said, is about our responsibility. So and when I think of values, I usually mention truth and love. That they're still in there. They're absolutely critical to what we need and what we need to do. And part of it in terms of media is truth, so truth in media, not the spinning and the lying and the ignoring things that we've seen that each of you mentioned in so many really eloquent ways. And as far as love, I think of that phrase that justice is what love looks like in public. And I'm going to say international law is what love looks like, or at least, respect looks like in the legal field, if only we didn't ignore it or be amongst the worst offenders or the worst offender, because I still believe that the greatest purveyor of violence in the world is our own government, as you were mentioning. So I'm just very grateful. I usually forget to introduce myself. So, Craig, thank you for mentioning my name. And I will just say that I've reclaimed my teenage nickname of Victory because we need the real victories. And I want to segue before we go further into the. Well, I guess I just want to mention the Peace Center annual dinner before we get too far into some of the other things, because Craig is going to be recognized at the Peace Center annual dinner, and he so deeply deserves it. And the Peace Center annual dinner is its major fundraiser of the year, and Kathy has been been a wonderful keynote speaker a number of times, and has come to the rescue for us at different times. And you have such a gift for giving human examples to the things that you're working on, the people that you come across in your work, in your international work for human rights, and for just caring for people in courageous, very courageous ways, and so consistent. So maybe if you just want to say a few words about, I'll just say, first of all, that it is on November 15th. People, if they go to wnypeace.org, there's a link to buy tickets, and there still are tickets. And it'll be a vegan dinner, Sunshine Vegan, that does such a great job. But the biggest thing is it's this very diverse and really just a gathering of the beloved community. So, and Kathy, you have led it off for us so many times. So do you want to say a word or two about that?
Well, the last time that I was there, I remember being so happy to see a table full of very bright-eyed and eager young Yemeni women. And their voices ought to be heard. You know, I think follow the young people everywhere, but particularly, I guess it was Salman Rushdie said that those who are forcibly displaced by war are the shining shards that reflect the truth. And you know, the Western New York Peace Center has been superb at giving a seat at the table, more or less, to many of the people who've been forcibly displaced and whose stories ought to guide us and be our moral compass. I was so happy to meet those young Yemeni women, and I wish them well now. I wonder what it means for young people from Yemen to see their country standing alone again,
Right.
trying to stand up to the desecration of Gaza and the West Bank. You know, I think the means you use will determine the end you get, and I don't want to be a cheerleader for bomb throwers, bomb droppers. But I do believe that Yemen has been punished again and again for taking a stance which has shown a lot more courage and spine with regard to challenging international officials. So I hope those young people are hearing from the adults in their lives that that they should respect their country for all the justice that it has stood up for.
You're so right, and that is a very beautifully put and very eloquent point about the courage of Yemen, and the courage of those young women who also presented their case to our then Congressperson Brian Higgins, actually he didn't even come. He Anyway, I don't want to go there, but they presented it to his office, or his person who his aide that he assigned. But they showed such courage. And actually, we have a young woman, Cayuga young woman, who's been working for the indigenous rights, and as a former peace jammer, and she's getting the Emerging Leaders Award this year. So it will be excellent. You'll meet her, Craig. So you're the one who will be there to meet her. So anyway, enough on the dinner. I just want to make that point. It will be great food and great spirit of solidarity and devotion, really, to making the changes that we need to make. So I think my my I don't know what. Oh, here. I think I froze for a minute. Did I?
I did too.
Oh, what?
It didn't seem like that to me,
Oh, good.
either of you.
Okay. Well, anyway, we're going to keep on because we're not going to worry about technical difficulties unless we have to. So anyway, so let us move on to what's going on in the UN and on the ground in Palestine and Israel for that matter. Although we know that the Israelis are, anyway, I'll just leave it to each of you in turn what you want to share about what you know, what you see, or what we want to see about the onslaught on Gaza right now and on Palestine. So Rob, why don't we start with you and the Code Pink and allies and United Allies World Court campaign?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what we see in Israel a few days ago was a vote in the Knesset. 90% of the parliamentarians voted to ban UNRWA's operations from Israel, which I think they believe means the occupied territories as well, because they're not interested in the decision that was given by the World Court and numerous General Assembly resolutions that say that the occupied territories are not Israel and that it's occupying those lands illegally. But this is really important, a really important vote, and I think it's had a pretty strong. There's been a response in Europe. I mean, it's never as strong as we need. It's not the courageous actions of the Yemenis who see genocide announced and warn that Israel has to be isolated and then take action to isolate Israel because it's carrying out that genocide. But it is nevertheless outrage at this vote in Europe among some quarters because in part, I mean, UNRWA is the lifeline. It's described as the lifeline for Palestinians. It's not only the lifeline for food and education, but it's also the repository of history. It is they collect archival materials for preserving Palestinian history. But what's important in this context and in what Israel's declared intention has been from October to starve the entire population of Palestine in Gaza is that this violates the among other things, the provisional measures that were issued in March by the World Court in response to South Africa's application there. And the provisional measure was to that Israel must ensure the provision of aid from all sources at scale to address the humanitarian crisis that the World Court recognized existed there. And in their original application in December, the South Africa they pointed out and they quoted General Secretary Guterres, who said that a ceasefire is necessary for humanitarian aid to get to the people of Gaza, but even short of a ceasefire, the World Court in its provisional measures declared that basically UNRWA has to be allowed to do what it is there to do, protect Palestinians by providing them with food, and they've been denied that, and now Israel its government has declared that they're banned. So I think it's that's what's happening in Israel. They're doubling down on the genocide, and I think there are parties in Europe. I think Norway among them, but I think also Spain have responded strongly And they need to respond by isolating Israel, by stopping military aid from putting into ports in their countries and from being delivered by planes from their countries or planes over their countries. That's what's happening in Israel. I want to leave time for other people to speak about what's happening elsewhere, but we're at the UN. Code Pink is we are sending letters to key UN member states to urge them to impose sanctions, arms embargoes, sanctions, and to form a tribunal. The General Assembly could form an international tribunal to try Israel for the war crimes that it is committing. There are a range of asks. I mean, the most urgent, obviously, are to force Israel to stop starving the Palestinians because the conditions there are horrendous. The bombing of hospitals, of schools being used to house refugees, just the gutting of the territory and the massacres that we hear about daily. There have to be forceful actions by the powerful countries, European countries that are the number one trading partner, or the European Union is with Israel, and then Turkey that is delivering oil to Israel. Jordan that is still trading with Israel. All these countries whose leaders say, things condemning what's happening, but have yet to take the forceful action that they can take and that they should take, and that I think that they're legally obligated to take to force Israel to stop. So we'll be sending letters to those key countries and asking for meetings with them, but also demonstrating outside of their missions and hopefully getting media attention to domestic outrage where they are experiencing, like in most countries in the world, a majority of their populations disgusted by what we've all witnessed over the last year, that are mobilized and trying to force their government to listen to their people. So that's what we hope that will happen. We'll be working on in the next weeks.
Well, thank you so much for that work. When I've been done any of some pieces of that work with you all, it's hugely important and very inspiring when some of the countries like Spain or Colombia, certainly South Africa above all, are doing something. At least some are doing something. But also when you're talking about local protests, I can't help also making a little parenthetical ask to Craig, if you could just, on the same topic, tell us about that. But before you do, just tell a little bit about the protest today in Western New York that I was very, 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 very sorry to miss. So if you would.
No, it was fantastic. I'm hoping Kathy can hear me by now.
Can you hear him?
Yeah. No. Okay. It's funny that she can only. Yeah, it's only me that she can't hear, and everyone else is fine. So I don't know.
But it is. We'll send you the whole tape, Kathy. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, the demonstration today was terrific. It was in front of the offices of Senator Gillibrand and Congressman Kennedy to present the petition to him that was led by Jewish Voice for Peace. A large number of people there that the JVP managed to turn out. I was there. It was a great pleasure to speak with all the sisters and brothers who turned out for that, to demand a very basic demand of these elected officials, that they respect American law, that they respect international law, that they respect the rulings of the International Court of Justice, and that they cease providing arms to the genocide that's happening in Palestine. So it was a great turnout. I think it was very empowering for the folks who were there, and a small delegation from amongst us was able to go upstairs and present these petitions in person to the staffs of of the respective offices, obviously not being received by the representatives themselves, and a lot of support on the street, people waving and beeping horns, nothing negative, all positive. I think gradually people are beginning to be educated about these matters. Yeah.
Right.
So that was the demonstration today. Yeah.
And then more as far as what's going on in the UN and on the international. And I just need to parenthetically say the articles that you have written that are just so compelling, concise, beautifully written, and so clear about the obligations. And we know the illegal acts that are going on in this country by our arms manufacturers. And Cassie, when we get to you, I definitely want you to talk about the merchants of death and how that's associated. But anyway, Craig, if you want to just,
Well, that's the work. That's the work. You know, we're up against this wall of propaganda, this blackout, and so on. And these writings are just meant to sort of unpack, debunk some of the propaganda and the misrepresentations that people are spoon-fed by corporate media in particular, and then to equip them with facts, which are very short at hand if you're living in the West, law, international law in particular, but also the logic of these things, so people are equipped to first think critically about what they're being told, and then secondly, to be able to push back. And I think Rob is right to start with underscoring Israel's recent move on UNRWA, the UN Relief and Work Agencies for Palestine Refugees, and its decision, Israel's decision in its Knesset, its parliament, to ban UNRWA, not just from Israel, but from the occupied territories. This is a campaign by Israel that goes back decades. From the very beginning, Israel has used every dirty trick in the book to try to attack UNRWA, because in Gaza, for example, the majority of people who are living in Gaza, those families are refugees, and the families of refugees who were forced out in 47, 48, 49, in the original Nakba, the original genocidal ethnic cleansing of Palestine, and they have held on to their refugee status as tightly as they've held on to the actual keys of their homes inside what is now called Israel, where other folks are living now. Having pushed them out. And so Israel has always realized that UNRWA represents it represents this kind of chain of the Palestinian people to their indigenous land and to their status as refugees, and therefore their right to return home. And as Rob said, it represents a lifeline that's keeping them alive so they can stay, for example, in Gaza without perishing, because UNRWA makes that possible as well. It's mandated by the General Assembly. Israel has no authority over UNRWA or to dissolve it or to keep it out. In doing so, Israel is in breach of a number of its international legal obligations. Rob mentioned, the provisional orders, provisional measures of the International Court of Justice in the genocide case, but there are a number of treaty obligations that they would be in breach of if they were to implement this decision as well. And finally, they have no authority whatsoever over UN personnel, UN assets, a UN presence in East Jerusalem, in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip. So they have legal obligations to cooperate with UNRWA inside of Israel, but they have no authority at all to purport to ban the operations of UNRWA from the occupied territories. They do so because they realize it's the last lifeline. And in the most current genocide, you can watch how systematically Israel has worked to make the conditions in Gaza less and less habitable, to ensure the destruction of the Palestinian people in Gaza. Remember, Gaza was already a prison before October 7th of last year. And because they had been falsely made dependent on humanitarian aid, because they've been imprisoned by Israel, they have been relying on 500 trucks a day of humanitarian aid just to survive in pre-October of last year levels. And those were levels where the caloric intake, health, and well-being, and so on indicators were extremely low because even those 500 trucks a day were inadequate. Since that time, all of Gaza has been destroyed. Its food production capacities, its food storage, its water, its sanitation, the houses, the bakeries, the agricultural fields. So everything has been destroyed there. So if they needed 500 trucks a day before the current wave of genocide, it's difficult to calculate what they would need in the current context. And the only thing standing between them and total destruction was UNRWA. And so now Israel has moved to get rid of that last barrier to the genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza, even as it has upscaled its genocidal assaults on Palestinians in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, over the course of these most recent months in particular. So what we're really seeing is this final wave of the genocide by this government in Israel, supported, by the way, by its Supreme Court, by its Knesset, by its media, by large numbers of clergy, and by the vast majority of the general public. Now, what's really striking here, Victoria, as well, is that it's not just attacking UNRWA in the way it has. Israel has the world record for the murder of UN staff. It has killed hundreds of UNRWA and other UN staff members. It has attacked countless UN schools, UN clinics, UN facilities, UN convoys, UN aid depots. It has slandered and lied about the UN. It has used its influence with Western allies to block funding to UN programs. In other words, it has breached on every conceivable level its obligations under international law, its obligations to the UN, and it has made the UN an enemy, which it has called a terrorist organization. In spite of this, Israel still has a seat in the General Assembly of the United Nations. And so that's why Rob and other activists have also been looking at how to make sure, as South Africa was during the heyday of apartheid, that Israel is suspended from its seat in the General Assembly and hopefully subsequently from its role in other UN agencies. It is inconceivable to me that an entity such as this, which attacks the UN on so many levels, which has kidnapped, arrested, and tortured countless UN staff members, still sits in the General Assembly and uses that seat to attack the UN as well. So if the UN is unwilling to defend itself, it falls again on all of us to mobilize to make sure that we defend international law and international institutions and then hold them accountable for doing their job.
Sheesh, what it is just so dire, so dire. And to be clear, so with all the international law that is being transgressed right now by Israel, to do with the bombing and the killing of innocent civilians, of proportionality, of journalists and UN workers and medical and humanitarian workers. Is it also true that per the World Court, the settlements are illegal and need to be disbanded, and the occupation is illegal and needs to be ended? And what to speak of the land that has been systematically encroached upon. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. The International Court of Justice has found that the occupation and all manifestations of that occupation are entirely unlawful, which means that every settlement, every settler, every soldier, and as I've said, every Israeli bicycle on a road in the occupied territories is unlawful and must be removed, that the apartheid wall must be dismantled, that the Palestinians must be compensated, that those forced out must be allowed to return. And not just ordering, finding that with regard to Israel, but also finding the legal obligation on all states, including the government of the United States, to cut off any support to those unlawful activities completely, and to use whatever power and influence they have to totally and immediately end that occupation. So, the problem here, of course, is the 76-year-old problem of Israeli impunity, underwritten by the West, especially the United Kingdom, the United States, Germany, but most especially the government of the United States, which ensures that international law does not apply to Israel. And that's why we find ourselves in a situation where we are getting closer and closer, where we have gone through genocide. We're getting closer and closer to total destruction. We're heading into a regional war of a kind that we've never seen before, with very powerful states, including Israel, which is a state that has massive stockpiles of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. Israel does. And then powerful states like Iran and others with close allies, including Russia, China, and others. Untold destabilization for countries across the region. We're heading toward this for one reason and one reason only, which is that Israel's Western allies, beginning with the United States, have decided that Israeli impunity is more important than the survival of the rest of us.
Well, we can't have it. We can't have it. So, and it's totally illegal, immoral, and foolhardy, and doesn't even help the Israelis in the end, of course, because they're more and more unsafe. But so, Cassie, please. First of all, I apologize for our technical difficulties where you can't hear Craig. So we'll make sure you get to hear him later on. But if you would speak a little bit about the Merchants of Death Tribunal and all the work that you've been doing on that, and how that relates to all of this about the situation in Gaza and the occupied territories.
Well, it's been very telling being on Zoom calls for organizing purposes with people from Palestine and Gaza, and to hear them talk during the call about immediate attacks that they're enduring. And one young man said, "This is the final solution. We're facing the final solution." And this group that I've been meeting with is planning what's called a global solidarity for peace in Palestine. And really, they've drawn their energy and incentive directly from what Robin, the Code Pink people in New York, and Craig and other professors have offered. They're placing a lot of hope in the possibility that the member states of the United Nations could unseat Israel, could be able to impose sanctions. And it was so telling to me also that 2,000 people from Israel living within Israel or in other parts of the world signed an open letter saying, within Israel, there is not the capacity to change that government. Please, they were begging the international organizations and the countries to impose sanctions and, basically consequences, teeth on Israel in order to stop Israel from, its own suicidal actions and the horrific suffering that's being imposed on others. So November 3rd, there will be a conference call, a follow-up conference call with this group featuring Raji Surani and Anne Wright and a woman named Amal Siam from Gaza who will give testimony. And that will be at 6 o'clock Palestine time. With the clocks changing in different parts of the world, it's a little bit hard to posit exactly the other times. But I hope people will join this call and then go to the World Beyond War website, where you can find a letter that will go to the permanent missions to the United Nations and sign that letter. As many people as can sign that letter would contribute towards some heft to then bring a delegation to meet perhaps with Secretary General Guterres. Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal has been quite grateful for the testimony of so many people and for the input of the jurors, and will be post-US election wrapping things up. And we do hope to bring all of those recommendations that have been made to the International Court of Justice and to the ICC as well. But, to me, the most important recommendations are the ones that say reparations ought to be paid. And I don't want to see anyone go to prison. I've been in prison, in federal prison for, a year at one spot and 3 months. But I want people to be rehabilitated. And I believe it's incredibly important that the people who are profiteers, who are making so many billions of dollars by developing, storing, and selling ways to blow other people up, be put out of business. And that's something that historically in the United States, people did clamor for at the end of World War I when they realized that industrialized slaughter had happened. So let's hope that people will come to their senses and stop treating the merchants of death as though they somehow were scions and moral compasses for our society.
So far from it, so very far from it. I want to say you have been so eloquent. And one of the things that is very clear is that it is big business. So the arms manufacturers are not going to be, they won't have the markets for their wares unless there's wars going on. So they have a vested interest, and they are very frank in some of their letters. This is great for our bottom line, they say. Well, it's not great for, back to what that reason I bring up of victory, the real victory, everyone wins. The other, the companion saying to that is there is no violent solution. So it will never be a solution bombing your way into whatever you think is a solution. And many Israelis, I hope that at least I know that some Israelis understand that, and some Jewish people, here, well, Jewish Voice for Peace is one of the biggest, and in Buffalo, it's one of the I am part of Jewish Voice for Peace, and proud to be part of it, proud to be a Jewish Voice for Peace in the synagogue as well. And people do thank me. Some people don't thank me, I'm sure, but some people really do thank, and they're troubled. So, but then they can join Jewish Voice for Peace and join raising our voices here. So, so let us go once more around, all the way around, about how people can help and get more involved. So I know, a couple of things have been mentioned, but just to re-emphasize what those things are, Rob, and we'll just go back, round circle again.
If I could just go a little bit off script, I just want to say,
Sure.
A difference between mobilization against this genocide and what we did, what activists were doing in the early 2000s in the run up to the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, is that there's so many more Muslim and Arab Americans engaged and fighting this. And back then, the Patriot Act and all of those the not that Islamophobic statements and sentiments aren't spread in our country, but there are really engaged and organized Arab and Muslim Americans, much different from before, I feel, and it's really like growing the anti-war movement, and it's such an important voice of people who have connections to the Middle East, whose insights and experience can inform the activism, and who are doing amazing work. So I just want to say, like a silver lining difference. We mobilized against the Iraq War, and we were dismissed as an opinion poll, but with the Muslim and Arab American brothers and sisters, we have a much greater chance of getting accountability, of stopping the slaughter, and of stopping the occupation, and stopping the expansion of the war. So I just wanted to say that.
That's a great point. Thank you for that, Rob. Thank you. That is big and very important. And also getting involved in your campaign, especially people who are in New York City, but also for the rest of us, we can come and/or go ahead.
Well, Kathy Kelly, mentioned the opportunity on World Beyond War to sign onto the petition and the letters that are going to UN missions or foreign ministries. I'm not sure who the exact target is, but it's other governments or their representatives. And if you're not in New York, that's a really important action. But in New York, we are. Code Pink, if you Google Code Pink, ICJ, resources, you can volunteer to help organize delegations to key countries' missions and let them know what you feel, what you've seen, and what you want them to do. We debrief afterwards, we prepare before, we have demands, but your voices, people's voices who would like to participate are welcome to help shape what the demands are and what these diplomats hear from just average Americans like myself who are trying to stop what's happening.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah.
And it's so well organized, so well done, so wonderful to be part of. I can vouch for that. Craig?
Yeah, I mean, solidarity is everything. That we are up against the greatest powers of the Western world, the government of the United States, of the United Kingdom, Germany, the European Union. We are up against powerful and wealthy media corporations. But when we're living in this Western bubble, where we see that, we have neighbors that have no idea that there is a genocide happening in Palestine. We have neighbors who are still believing the false stories and are not aware of the truth that has been happening. So that means we have a privilege, all of us on this call, all of us who are watching, we tend to be the people that are a bit more informed, and we have a responsibility to share that information to educate our neighbors, and in educating them, to mobilize them. And I think that's a part of our obligation of solidarity as well. We have to raise holy hell, because the hope is that we are intimidated enough by the repression that's happening in our own societies, by the way we are treated by the media, by the way we're treated by government officials, university administrators, and others, the police, who have all been working to silence us because we are a threat to this status quo of genocide and of apartheid. If all we had were the mouths of the government officials in this country and the reports of the corporate media in this country, they would be okay. No one would know about their crimes that we are paying for with American tax dollars, with American military support, with American economic support, with American intelligence support, with the use of the American veto, with American official propaganda at the podiums of the State Department and the White House and others. So they would never know about the reality of what's happening. So we have an obligation to make sure that they do know. But we have on our side, we have the truth on our side. We have, as Rob says, a growing solidarity and a growing movement like we haven't seen in many, many years to challenge this. And what you might not be aware of if you're in the US or Canada or Europe is that we also have the overwhelming majority of people in the world on our side, and most governments of the world are also on our side. So we just have to shake loose this false reality that's been imposed on people here, make sure that they know the truth, and then make sure people are mobilized to stop the horrors that are being committed in our name.
We can do that, and I'm going to suggest that people go to your website and share some of your writings and things. And Kathy, we're virtually out of time, but I'm just going to please give. Now, I know you said that the World Beyond War website is another place where people can. It's very important to go to. And a last thought that you want to share.
Well, a mantra of sorts for voices over the years was where you stand determines what you see. And I'm so impressed by friends of mine who are going over to the West Bank. Some are leaving this week. And tomorrow I'll meet a young woman from Notre Dame who just got back. She's a university student. And I think when people come back with their testimony, it's important that we feature them. So I have a chance to talk with students at St. Olaf's tomorrow, but I said, let me give part of my time over to Grania Malone, who has just come back from the West Bank. And given what happened to the young student from Seattle who was killed, it's a very brave step for people to take. But I think that that's one of the most important things we can do, to try to make plans to be alongside people who can't escape from the terrible, terrible suffering that's being every day intensified. So thank you for this time. And Craig, you can bet that I will check your website and listen to you. I'm so sorry to have missed this opportunity. I was looking forward to it. Vicki, one of these days.
Yes. So thank you so much. I couldn't express how grateful, how vital all of your loving work is. So thank you. This is Talking Peace, and together we've been talking peace in truth and love. Okay.